Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to my belated version of MADPD 2019. Apologies to those of you who waited for me yesterday. I had some unfortunate technical issues, which I'm hoping have been resolved. As Carol tweeted, the good news is you can always post your presentation later. So thanks to those of you who waited patiently, and welcome to those of you who are going to enjoy the benefit of a slightly delayed presentation. So I'm just going to screen or slide share my screen with you so that I can share my presentation. And so, I had the wonderful opportunity to present at the Celebrating Linguistic Diversity Conference, which was just this past Thursday. And for those of you who weren't there, I'm delighted that I can share some of my thoughts and experiences over the last several months to a year about writing and how to cultivate English language learners and how to inspire and engage them as authors. And so just a little bit about my presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about motivation and why it's important to writing and really generally to learning. And this is not a new query to me, but it is something that, as I thought about writing, seemed to be of particular importance. And I'll talk more about that. And then I'm going to take a look at writing results, our standardized writing test results called EQAO in Ontario, and then a little bit about the Ontario curriculum and maybe how that feeds into motivation or perhaps a lack of motivation, or perhaps a kind of a skewed focus when it comes to writing, and in terms of how we see that as teachers, as we try to kind of fit all those curriculum expectations into our very short days, and maybe how we're losing sight of an important foundation to writing, which may be, and I think is, motivating writers. And then to talk a little bit about how to motivate students to write, and I'll talk about my inspiration for that and some of my thoughts about how to cultivate authors from a recent book I read by some of my Thames Valley Board colleagues, and how I took that book and I started to think about how I might cultivate writers instead. And then how, using technology became an important component to this for me, as it has been over the last several years, and looking for an easy way, an engaging way, a useful way to engage students to write. And I really have come to love the app Write Reader, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So I want to give not too long of a shout out, but a brief shout out to those who have supported, mentored, inspired me in my learning journey as a teacher. And this is maybe just a brief, or it is a brief kudos to those people. But I am not the most comfortable with technology, and as you can imagine, having my presentation yesterday not work was extremely stressful for my Sunday. And I think it's important maybe to understand that, for me, every undergraduate paper that I wrote as a student and ever published was actually done on a typewriter. And, as I reflect back on that, even typewriters came with their share of stress. I can recall one very late Sunday evening, typing up a paper for a class that was due the next morning, and realizing I had run out of typewriter ribbon, of course. And of course, nothing was open on a Sunday. I'm not even sure that stores opened on Sundays at all at that time. And I remember a very tearful call to my mother, who lived in London, Ontario, where I live now, and who really fell short of being able to help me, other than to console me and to say that perhaps next time I should have started writing that earlier or bought ribbon at an earlier date. But having said that, stress comes with learning and comes with stretching ourselves. And I believe that to prepare my students for the 21st century of learning, that I need to learn more about how to support and engage them with technology and how to feel comfortable with that. And so simply just engaging in these workshops for me is about stretching that aspect. And I think, I give a kudos to my board for providing me with an iPad. I mean, 2 years ago, I gave a presentation on pedagogical documentation, and that was entirely inspired by, a single iPad that I was given by my school board to document learning. And now I'm kind of looking at technology in a new way about how I inspire my students. I want to thank Twitter, and especially Carol Salva, who really got me tweeting after a presentation to our school board. I think it was only about a year ago. But as a result of stretching myself in that avenue, I have a wonderful professional learning network of mentors and colleagues and teachers. And I learn, and I'm so inspired by the things that they post and share. And, I try to make it a goal to post and share things myself. And so I thank that. And in this particular session, I was inspired by the writing strategies that Carol outlined in her book, Boosting Achievement. My school board, the ESL teacher group, had a book club where we looked at strategies from the ELL Teacher's Toolbox by Larry Ferlazzo. And, I've drawn on that for this presentation. And maybe kind of the most poignant was a book that I was gifted by some teacher colleagues in my board, Anne Elliott and Mary Lynch, called Cultivating Readers. And, I read the book with a mindset of thinking how to motivate writers. And so, I kind of used their framework as I read that book and thought, well, this is how they cultivate readers. And I love their ideas and suggestions. I strongly suggest that you take a look at that text. But I kind of framed it in my own mind about writers, because that was really what was at the forefront for me, how to engage, how to cultivate authors within my group of English language learners. So what really spoke to me when I think about cultivating authors is motivating them. What is motivation? And there's lots of different definitions, but a good working definition in my mind is this one, that it's a persuasive feeling and it provides positivism. It's a positive outlook for students, and that feeling, that positivism, allows them to move forward through a task or an activity and succeed in it, no matter how challenging it is. And I think it's important to say that writing is challenging. I think it's challenging for adults. I know it's challenging for me. I know it's challenging for my students because I ask them, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But it's tough. And I thought about this in a reading context, and I thought, with reading, we have the text, the words are there. And yes, we have to use our reading strategies and our comprehension strategies to bring meaning to it. But someone else has done the hard work of putting words to paper. And when we talk about writing, it generally starts with a blank page. And I think that's, a daunting task for children, for students, I think even for adults. And I think if we think of motivation as a force that initiates, guides us, and helps us to maintain goal-oriented behaviors, I think that's important, because when we're faced with a task that's difficult and tough, we need something that guides us, and we need something that directs us back on that path of being goal-oriented. What do I want to achieve? And again, I think part of that is, what do students want to achieve from writing? I think part of motivating them is having them understand the purpose and what their personal kind of guide or goal is for what they write. And why is motivation important? And I think, this is probably not rocket science, but, when we're motivated, we're engaged and we contribute and we apply ourselves in a learning situation. But likewise, when we're not motivated, that's a major barrier that can prevent us from succeeding in that task. And I think oftentimes it's a lot of negative self-talk that interferes about not feeling successful or able. And again, those were the kinds of things that I got from my students when I talked to them about that. So that's a major barrier. If you think that you can't, you probably can't. But if you think that you can, you will. And I think that's important. And you know, at a base part of all this, you know, when we write, this is how we communicate learning in all aspects of the curriculum, not just in language arts, but in all areas, social studies, science, math. And then in order to succeed in life beyond the classroom, we need to be able to write. And for any of you who have looked at any of the research related to 21st century learning, students will be required to write more in the 21st century than at any other time in history. And it's interesting because sometimes the talk that I hear is that we don't expect them to write. They don't know how to write. We allow them just to text, you know, and there isn't an emphasis on writing. But, you know, if you really look deeply at the expectations for being successful in the world beyond school in the 21st century, they will and have to write in order to be successful. So it's an important skill. It's a very important skill. And so then I started to think about the EQAO results in writing. And this is for those of you that are based in the US, this is our Ontario education accountability assessments that happen in grade 3 and 6, and then a literacy assessment in grade 10. And provincially, over the last 5 years, there's been an interesting history with achievement as in regards to writing. And so, you know, if we look at the grade 3 students who achieved the provincial reading standard, it's increased in reading, which is great. But it's decreased by 6 percentage points for writing in that same time frame. The percentage of grade 6 students has increased by 2% in writing. So a little bit better in grade 6, but certainly something that I feel concerned about when I think about the grade 3 results. In the past 5 years, the gender gap in grade 3 writing and even at grade 6 is obvious in favor of grade female students. So, you know, it's the difference has been between 11 and 13 points in writing in grade 3 and 13 and 17 points in writing in grade 6. So, you know, clearly there's some gender issues here, and there's a lot of why, and there's not an answer, obviously, but there's some things to be concerned about. How are we meeting the needs of the writing needs of male students in our schools if the gender difference is so vast? Most concern to me is the English language learners, and you know, the percentage of grade 3 students meeting the standard in writing has decreased by 7 and 8 percentage points respectively since 2013 2014, and in grade 6 it's been relatively stable, but when we look at students with special education needs, knowing that many of our English language learners also cross this barrier as well, so some of these students are also English language learners, there's been a 6-point decline in writing, and in grade 6, a 4-point decline. So somehow the needs of these learners seem that they are not being met. And again, I look at the EQAO results, the standardized tests provincially that we have, and I know this is a one snapshot, you know, every few years, and it's not, you know, the be all and end all. But I think some of, you know, the history of this is worth looking at and worth paying attention to. As part of that standardized assessment, the students are also asked some questions in a survey. They're pretty basic questions, but in grade 3, they're asked if they like to write and if they feel they are good writers. And obviously in grade 3, more female than male students indicated that they like to write and feel that they are good writers, but still we're looking at a 50% 50% of them that feel that way on average. In grade 6, again, more female than males responded most of the time to "I like to write, I'm a good writer." But when we look at that, I mean, within the male writers, 30%, a third. And these are the students that are actually achieving higher results in writing, but they seem not to like it or not to feel that they're good at it. And so, you begin to wonder if they actually felt like they liked to do it and they felt that they were good at it, how might those results change? And, I'll share with you, briefly some of the research related to motivation in writing. And the research would say very much so that if we could motivate and engage these writers, that these results would increase simply due to the motivation factor. And I think that's pretty powerful. So any of you involved in education are probably familiar with Maslow's self-actualization theory. It's actually a hierarchy. And it talks about, kind of 5 basic needs that students need to have met in order to be motivated. And, the most basic need, which is physiological, which is just food, water, warmth, rest. I think we know that. We understand that. We have food programs. We know that students that come to school without food, without warmth, without rest are not really ready to learn. But, the idea here with Maslow's theory is that if those basic needs aren't met, the higher needs can't be achieved. And so those lower needs need to be met. And then the next one will surface and it demands to be met as well. And so the lower needs need to be met before one can be motivated by a higher need. And, that higher need is actually self-actualization and achieving someone's full potential. But prior to that, students need physiological needs met. They need safety needs. They need to feel secure and they need to feel safe. They need to have a community of writers in their classroom where they're free to take risks. They need to have social needs met. They need to feel belongingness. They need to feel that they have friends, that they have, again, this community of learners within their classrooms. And then they have esteem needs. They need to feel a sense of accomplishment, and they need to feel some sense of prestige over their learning. And then finally, we get to self-actualization. And, I think a similar theory, and there's lots of theories of motivation. I mean, this is a very quick snapshot, but, another one that I think relates to writing and education is self-determination theory. And it also identifies some basic needs that are vital for self-motivation. And these needs are competence, relatedness, and autonomy. And, I think, competence, feeling able, feeling that you have the ability is key. When I think about the survey results I did with my own students, I mean, that's a key part of that. Relatedness, feeling like what you're doing or why you're doing it has a greater purpose. I think that, to me, spoke loudly as well. And then autonomy, having choice. And, I don't think this is just, related to writing in particular, but relating to learning in general. Like, how much autonomy and choice do students have over what they do, over what they write, over the topics they write? And I think, again, that's an important thing that we need to think about if we're going to, engage our students and motivate them, knowing that motivation is really a key foundation to learning and success. And so if you look at some of the other research studies related to motivation in writing, they talk about motivating students by just starting with simple writing activities and building upon those to gradually improve their writing skills. And this may be, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Linda Reef and her prompts for writing. I mean, it doesn't have to be long involved writing. It doesn't always have to go to a revision and editing stage or a publishing stage, but it's really about getting students to start small and to gradually increase those skills, to give them some feelings of success, autonomy, competence, as we think about those motivational theories. And really the first step, according to the research, is to engage them when they have a purpose or when they're interested in the subject or medium. So give them a purpose to write. Let them choose something they're interested in, or give them a medium with which to write that's going to engage them. So motivation is the first step in improving their skills. And, I think as we start to look at curriculum, we realize that, we're not maybe going to find the inspiration for that in our curriculum. And in Ontario, our language arts curriculum has many subject-specific expectations, but if you look closely at those, none of them address student interest and motivation to write. And in fact, our language curriculum is very skills-based. It's a skills-based curriculum. And strategy and skill instruction is just not enough, in my opinion, to ignite writing passion. And I think our EQAO results speak to that. Students don't like to write, even if they're actually doing okay at it. If you ask them about it, they're not loving it. So could we increase our results just by increasing motivation and engagement? And I think yes. So how do we create a classroom environment where students develop a love for writing and actually see the value of it in their lives? They see the purpose of why writing and developing writing skills are important. And this to me is where I come to a book called Cultivating Readers by my colleagues in the Thames Valley District School Board, Anne Elliott and Mary Lynch, called Cultivating Readers. And so I was gifted this book by them. Thank you very much, ladies. And I read it and I loved it, and I thought it was full of great ideas, but my head was really thinking about writing. And so as I read it, I thought about what they said in terms of reading, but I was thinking, okay, how does this relate to writers? And so I'm just going to kind of share some of my thoughts about how I thought, that might happen. And so the first thing they talk about is sharing your writing life. And so if you want to create a community of authors, we have to create experiences and events that allow that to happen. And so one way to do that is to share your writing life. And essentially, students just need to know that you value writing and that you want to share your love of writing with them. So what do you write? Why do you write? How do you write? And I know that some of you might feel like you don't identify with yourself as a writer. And so one of the things that was suggested in their book was to take Nancy Atwell's suggestion from her book In the Middle. She talks about examining reading territories. I suggest you examine your writing territories. And really what that means is for the next week, you take an inventory of all the writing that you do. List everything from text and thank you cards and emails to newsletters. And you might actually be surprised how much and what you write in a week. And think about how you might share that with your students in terms of, sharing your writing life. The other suggestion, make a commitment to write for a certain amount of time each day. Whether that means you start a blog or a classroom newsletter or whatever it might be. Maybe it's just a private journal, but make a commitment to spend some time each day writing. Think about what kinds of writing you enjoy as a student. Share that with your student. Were there writing activities? Were there writing assignments? Were there pieces of writing that you feel particularly proud of? Who are your writing mentors? What authors inspire you? And share that with your students. The other thing they talked about, which I believe in wholeheartedly, was knowing your students. And, interest inventories, writing surveys, student-teacher conferences are really key in knowing your students as individuals, what they like, what they don't like, what their experiences are, what their opinions, what their thoughts are. This is powerful information for you as a teacher to help you build your learning, your teaching and learning with your students. And so I just wanted to share a little bit of some of the survey questions I asked my students. And, one of the things I asked them is, what do you have to do to be a good writer? And my students said things like concentrate, read it over, read it a couple of times, make it neat, have titles, use periods, capitals, and exclamation marks. And another said, just learn how to write. I also asked them what the easiest part of writing for them was, and they said it's easiest when they can start with a picture. And I thought about that as a lot as an English as an ESL teacher with ELLs, that we know that visual supports are important. And so, that was, supported a lot of what I thought. One of my students said, sounding out easy words was easiest. Another student said the name, date, and title was the easiest. Another student said the illustrations were the easiest part. And another said writing short sentences. And so, I started to see this trajectory of a lot of conventions of writing in terms of what good writing was to them. And quality was not something that seemed to come up a lot in these survey results. I asked them what the hardest part was, and they said the actual writing, because it hurts my hands. And that made me think about students who actually do have issues with fine motor skills, for whom writing is a really onerous physical task. Why not give them technology in order to help with that? My student who said the easiest part was sounding out easy words said spelling was the hardest part when the words were hard. Another student said the hardest part was capitals, because I always forget them. Thinking about how to make a story was another response. I said, how do you get good ideas? One of the students said, I use my imagination and I think of things that I already know about. And I thought that was enlightening, because if we give students a choice on what they write, they're going to write about things they know. And that is going to help them. It's going to make it easier and more successful and probably more motivating. One of my students said, I try to see something, and if it looks interesting, I'll write something about it. So, this visualizing piece, it was interesting how frequently it came up with my English language learners. When I asked them why I thought it was important, they told me it was that so people can understand what they're saying. They also said to get facts. They said to text someone, to write notes. And so I think they had the beginnings of why it was important to write. But I knew that there were some things that I could definitely build on. And, my goal after taking the survey with those students was to spend some time with them, focusing more on some of these tactics that I'll discuss here, and seeing if some of that motivating factor fed into some different responses that they might have at the end of the year. The third part was the importance of modeling writing and not just assigning it. And I think that sometimes our fear, or maybe our lack of knowledge as teachers, when it really comes to the nitty-gritty part of writing, makes us less apt to model it as we do with reading, and more apt just to assign it as a task. And so, writing expert Donald Graves says, write with the children. And when we write, we provide a role model, and we're an important role model for our students. And when we do that and we think aloud that process, we're demystifying the act of writing. And I think, and I do believe, that students think that experienced writers find it easy, or they have some magic ability. But if we write in front of them, we can actually show them and model for them that it's not perfect and it is difficult. And that there's a process to it that we can also model for them. And I think more than anything, we can learn some empathy for our students, because if we're not writing in front of them, if we're not modeling it, we forget that it is a challenging thing to do. It's a blank page, and there's a little bit, I think, of uncomfortableness in that fact for everyone, even for most of us as teachers. The fourth point that they talk about in their book is, making the why we need to write visible. And I thought about ways that we can do that. And Stephen Krashen, who is most infamous for his second language acquisition theories, it says that writing style doesn't actually come from writing experience, but from reading. So what we need to do is ensure that our students are reading text that is full of writing potential. And I think even more than that, that we're actually using those mentor texts as ways to show them and model and point out good authorship. And so using mentor texts when we're thinking about different forms of writing, to do author studies where we're not just talking about the different books that they've read and kind of broad themes, but we're actually talking more about how they write and that craft of how authors come to writing. And they all have very different paths in their process. And I think it's important to share with students that there's no one right way. And maybe that's what makes writing particularly challenging too. An author's chair, making sure we make the time. It's busy. And I think oftentimes our author's chair at the end of our learning our language block is the thing that kind of gets left out. But, letting and providing time for students to share what they've written with their peers is motivating and engaging. It gives them a purpose and an audience that I think they need. And one of the things that we did with our books, with Right Readers, we had author celebration. So, we wrote our books, we published them, and we invited parents and even our peers in our classrooms to read them and share them and look at them. And that was a real motivating purpose to write. And they really did, I think, come to see themselves as authors, which was my main goal. Providing time and space to write. And so, just like with reading, if we want to cultivate a community of writers, then the physical space of our classroom should communicate that this is a place where writers work. So comfortable places to write, abundant supplies available for them, space to work cooperatively, space for teachers and students, or students and students to conference about writing. Student writing and mentor texts and authors should be displayed in the classroom. So we need to make sure that our classroom speaks to anyone who comes by, even when our students aren't there, that this is a place that cultivates authors. And I think finally, as always, my purpose is to think about how to connect to technology. And if you look at the writing, the research, students are motivated by and respond positively to technology. And so we need to think about how we can include technology as a tool or as a resource when we're creating our lesson plans, knowing that they will be more likely to achieve and perform at their highest levels because of those resources that are made available to them in the classroom. And so this is really how I came to Right Reader, and a shout out to Emily Francis as part of my Twitter professional learning network. She was the one who first posted photos of her students using this learning-based platform. And I was in this mindset and I explored it. And I was really, really excited about the potential. And, I'm not going to play the video. It's about 7 or 8 minutes. It's available on the rightreader.com website. It really talks about the foundation of this. So it's a learning-based platform that was developed in Denmark. It's free, which I love. And it's super, super user-friendly. And I was really inspired by reading about the Book Fair project that was part of about this platform, and seeing the kind of work that Emily Francis and others had done in their classroom. And so, we talk about, motivation, and yes, that's important. And I think it's ultimately important, but, we do have skills within the curriculum that we have to address. And so I just want to talk a little bit about the process. And so, obviously we have this piece of technology, which is wonderful, but, students are expected to plan their writing. There is a process. And so, we know that graphic organizers are important to planning. Larry Ferlazzo talks about this in his ELL Teacher's Toolbox. And so we use organizers to plan our writing. So we brainstormed, we planned, largely on paper pencil, although not all the time, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But we had that planning foundation in place before we got to the technology. But I will say, I think knowing that they were going to use the technology, perhaps to draft and to publish their writing, was definitely a motivator to get them through this planning process. That was very clear to me. As I think about my English language learners, another way that I used Right Reader was to help develop their vocabulary. And so these are some of my step one English language learners who were just using Right Reader just to develop really simple vocabulary. And you can see at the top our spring words. There is a wonderful, extensive database of images in Right Reader. No need to Google search or have them go outside of the internet into kind of unknown territory. Really easy searchable, vast numbers of images. And so some of these images themselves are just an inspiration to write. And my students talked about that in their survey, that pictures to them were an inspiration for their writing. And so in this instance, students were just looking for images of spring words, and they were writing about that. And you could see that students are also able to use Right Reader in a dual language sense. So the student at the top was writing in English, but she was also writing using the Arabic keyboard and writing in Arabic as well. In the lower book, the students are also able to use the iPad and take pictures. So our book at school was really just, kind of wandering around and taking pictures of things that we saw at school, and then writing simple vocabulary books about those things. And the students loved taking pictures of themselves, of each other, of me, of different things within the school, but then also putting that to words. So understanding that, written, books have a written text that matches the pictures and that carries a message. And one of the things that, I focused a lot on with these step one and step two readers and writers was something from Carol's book about, using writing frames and sentence frames. And so you can see in the top left-hand corner, we worked a lot on sight word vocabulary. These were sight words that the students could read. We developed sentence frames so they could read these sentence stems. And then as they were taking photos of things around the school, or as they were searching spring words from the image bank in Right Reader, they were able to create short sentences that they could read based on that vocabulary, which was, again, it was not just writing, but it was actual reading practice. So that was wonderful for me as well. Another thing, different forms of writing. So during the Chinese New Year, we created Chinese New Year books. We talked about opinions versus facts. And we generated a bunch of opinions. Again, we used sentence frames for that. They generated some facts that they had gained through some of the read alouds we'd done, some of the reading that they had done, and generated text related to that. And kind of beyond sentence frames are also paragraph frames. And so as students kind of get beyond just simple sentences, we can start to give them organizers where they have actual paragraph frames. And so some of my older students created creature reports, and they had a scaffold where they were able to kind of write a paragraph about the creature that they had chosen. Again, we used the paragraph frame as part of our planning, and then they were able to carry that on and write it in Right Reader. Talking about how photos spark writing. This is Misha. He's a Russian student that came to my school in October, and he loves this. So this gender issue of boys, I think probably the boys in my ESL group have done more writing with Right Reader beyond school than any of my students. And so there's something about this that speaks to them, and it's really powerful. And he loves cats. He's written several books on cats, and often he chooses images that he likes. And our last conversation was, he does not actually have a cat, and I suggested to him that maybe his next book on cats, rather than being fact-based, should be an opinion piece that he can share with his parents to perhaps get him a cat. But, using photos to spark writing is something that Larry Filazzo also talks about in his ELL teacher's toolbox. Another purpose we used for Right Reader was, micro themes. So, taking, we had a group of students who were learning about the water cycle. We did some guided reading surrounding that. The students pulled some key ideas out of that writing. They created an organizer kind of based on this micro theme, and then they were able to actually, take that and develop it into a text in Right Reader. And I think I said before, I think knowing that they're going to use Right Reader to kind of publish their writing is something that really motivates them through the harder part, I think, of the reading and perhaps the drafting and brainstorming. Around Halloween, we carved pumpkins, and we did some shared writing about the steps to carve a pumpkin, and that led into some independent writing of procedural writing, and the students chose things that they were interested in, that they had experience with or knowledge of, and they wrote their own text. And I think one of the wonderful things about Right Reader is that in addition to just writing the book and choosing some wonderful images, they're actually able to read the text. And I just want to share this book by Raneem. Raneem came to our school in October, brand new to Canada, and I think this recording and reading of this text is wonderful reading practice, fluency, confidence, esteem, and as she can do it on her own, and she can practice and rehearse until she feels really comfortable, and then she wants to share it with everyone. It's really positive. So this was her book about how to make waffles.
How to make waffles for you. First, get an apple. Then, get some sugar, strawberry, flour, and egg and milk. Next, put them in a bowl and stir. After, pour the mix into the pan and cook them. Finally, eat the waffles.
So it's just really exciting for me to see how positive it is for them to actually see themselves as authors. Creating dual language text, and this was a student. This student arrived April the 17th. She's just quite new here from Japan. She created her book about spring as a dual language text, and again, it was really wonderful to hear her practicing her English as she got more confident with the language. Sorry, I'm just trying to open.
Spring Bird by Elena. There are bird eggs.
So again, really positive feelings, I think, of esteem for these students as they're interacting and using Right Reader. And there's a lot of wonderful supporting components to this for English language learners that I'll talk about more in detail in a minute. I talked about using mentor text. Probably one of the best experiences I had at the beginning of the year was, using the mentor text, the best part of me, and having students write about their best parts. I mean, this is really about esteem, about celebrating our differences. And you can see this student, Emily, added some dual language to hers, as several of the students did. But this was a whole class activity, and they all felt very proud. And students were able to contribute what they were able to contribute. And I think at the end, everyone felt successful. They all felt like authors. And that really made me happy. So I don't want to go into a whole lot of detail, because if you go to writereader.com, there are a couple of videos that are extremely supportive in terms of getting you set up with this as your class. But I want to highlight just how easy this really is. The first step is just signing up as an educator. And so when you go to the login page, it actually defaults to children, which is wonderful. But to log in or sign up as an educator, you just need to click that button and flip the switch. And the first thing you'll need to do is sign up. And all you need is an email and a password. Super simple. And once you've signed up, the next step is going to be to add students. And so you're going to see on your page this button with the student plus. So if you click that, you're going to add a class. And you can add as many classes as you want. There's no limit to the number of students per class, to the number of classes that you can have. Again, this is free, which is wonderful. One of the things that I will make a suggestion for in terms of, adding students, I try to make this really simple, and I try to protect them as much as possible. So when you're adding students, you have to give them a username, and there's an option to add their name and their first name and last name. I don't worry about last names. Their username is their first name, and I don't even ask for a capital. So if their first name is Anthony, their username is Anthony without a capital. I don't actually indicate any last name unless I have students with more than one name in that class, and I may put, just the first letter of their last name, but I try to keep that simple. So all they need is a username and then their class code. And so once you've created a class, you will have, a class code. And so students log in with their username, ideally just their first name, and then whatever class code has been assigned to your class. And then once they get in there, students just have to click that plus sign that they see to create new books. And on the title page, they can, add their title, their name as the author, the microphone is where they can record their book. This is where they can add images. They can add images from the image bank. They can add photos. It's very user-friendly. They can add a new page, and after the title page, every subsequent page has a spot for student writing. It also has a second area for either adult writing or dual language, and it really depends. Sometimes if students are creating a dual language text, we'll use one area for English and one for their home language. Sometimes if they're writing in English, I might use that second area for revision. So when I conference with them, we may actually put the grammatically correct writing in that box as I conference with them through that process. So that kind of changes depending on the purpose. And certainly I encourage them to use it at home. Again, all they need is their username and their class code. And I encourage my students to create books at home. So, I don't necessarily sit down and conference with them over every single book. I want them to write. I want them to see themselves as authors. I want them to think it's motivating and engaging. And so I'm not revising every single text that they write. The other nice thing is that you can share through link sharing. It's really easy. So you get a link that's generated for completed books. You can download that. You can email the link, or you can print the text. So again, really super friendly and easy to use. Some special features that I really like, again, as I demonstrated before, they can use voiceover. This is one of my students, Alin, and she had written a book, a creature report about penguins. She was having a little bit of trouble with some of the vocabulary, and so she was recording and re-recording as she rehearsed the pronunciation. And it's kind of hard to hear, but I tried to capture this quickly because I was so excited to hear that this was really a fluency piece. And I wasn't forcing her to do this. She wanted to record her book and she wanted to do a good job. So she was rehearsing and recording and re-recording and laughing through the process. This was not stressful for her. She was just trying to get it right because she wanted to be able to share this with her peers and feel confident. Oh, I guess that's not going to play. The other aspect is text to speech. So students can also instead of just writing the text, they can speak. They can talk the text. And so there's a microphone that will allow them to record. I guess one of the things I'll suggest with this is that sometimes for English language learners, if there's strong accents, that can be a challenging thing, which is why I like starting with sentence frames. So maybe if it's just a single word that they have to say, text to speech, to have it picked up by the microphone, that's sometimes easier, but I love this function. And I think it's useful. And students have to reread and look back at what they've read or what they've said, and evaluate whether or not they got that meaning across. And the other thing is autofill. So as they're typing the text will populate, and they can start to see, oh, that's the word penguin, and I've got pen, and now penguin has come up, and I recognize that that's the right word, so they can autofill. The other aspect is you can turn on sound to the keyboard through Right Reader, and so the letter sounds will speak through audio as they're typing. So k, t, so they can hear those sounds as they're typing. So that's something you can turn on or turn off, whether or not you think it's beneficial for the students, but I think it's a useful feature. There's some other great features. Again, I'm not going to play this video, but it's on the website. It's wonderful to kind of give you a sense of some of the other things that might not be intuitive to you as the teacher, and that you can certainly guide your students toward as they're using Right Reader. And my students, they love it. They want to use it. As I said, I think they persevere through a lot of the hard part of writing because they know they're going to get to the point where they're able to use Right Reader to publish what they've written, and it is a huge motivator to them for that reason. So anyway, I would strongly encourage, I'm proud to be an ambassador for Right Reader, and I would strongly encourage you to explore it, not just in terms of motivating your students, but I think it does, but also for the skills and strategies that you can teach through that medium. Anyway, thank you again for joining me, and thanks for your patience and coming back, and I hope to see you next year.